Got it. It's a little bit bigger than 3 pounds, or 2.5 pounds. Ooh, God. Got her. In the mouth.
Hey guys, Tyler Berger here with Bass Fishing HQ. Today I want to talk about 3 tactics that you can use to catch more bedfish this year. Stay tuned, it's going to be a good one. Alright guys, so this video is really for the person that can visually see a bass. No matter if you're fishing like a root bed or if you're fishing a sand bed, if you can see bass land on gravel, if you can visually see the bass and you're sight fishing, this video is for you. Now I'm eventually going to make a video of actually blind bed fishing, which is something that we do a lot, and sometimes we're doing this even though we don't know that we're doing. So before we get into the bed fishing tactics, it's really important to know whether or not a fish is actually catchable. So when you find a fish that's on the bed, whether you're walking along the bank and you find a bed, or whether you're in your boat and you're specifically looking for fish, it's really important to see if a fish is actually catchable before you start even fishing it. You don't want to waste a bunch of time on a non-catchable bass. So let's first quick talk about how do you know if a bass is catchable that's on a bed. There's a number of things that you can look at here, but really one of the biggest things that you can look for is how close, how tight, how locked down is that fish on the bed. If you come up on that fish, again, whether you're fishing from the bank or if you're on a boat, say you come within about 10 or 15 feet of that fish and you can actually see it. If that fish scurries away and it doesn't come back for several minutes, that bass is not very catchable. You might be able to sit there and mess with it, but if it's going away for several minutes at a time and then coming back, that fish is going to be extremely hard to catch. And I'm going to tell you right now, you need to just pass that fish by. Now, if a fish is locked on the bed, you hear that term a lot, locked on. What does that mean? If a fish is locked on the bed, meaning you get really close to that bed and that fish isn't moving, right? It's pretty much staying on that bed, or maybe it's making really quick circles real close to the bed. It's not leaving for minutes. That is a catchable bass, and that is the ones that you want to try and catch. Now, with that being said, if you guys ever come up on a pair of bass that are actually like bumping and rubbing on the bed, that is not usually a good thing. If they're in the process of mating, if they're bumping and rubbing, it is really hard to catch that bass. Even if they're staying right there on the bed, it is because they got their mind, like they got their mind set, right? Like if you were with your wife or whatever and a cheeseburger flew in from nowhere, like you ain't paying attention to it, you know what I'm saying? So anyways, never mind about that. Make sure that the fish is catchable before you even start trying to fish for that bass. So let's talk about 3 tactics that you can actually use to be able to catch fish that are locked on, that are catchable fish. So the first one that I use probably most of the time is really what I call punching the bass, right? And that sounds a little bit bad, but basically what I'm going to do here is if I see a fish that's on the bed, I'm going to take typically some sort of soft plastic bait, and I'm going to pitch that bait behind the fish, and I'm actually going to pop that bait and actually hit the fish with my lure. And I'm going to basically take this fish off. Like the whole point of me doing this is really to kind of piss off the bass. So I'm gonna pitch behind that fish and I'm gonna keep hitting it with my lure. So typically what happens, guys, when you finally get a bass kind of ticked off enough that he's gonna bite a bait, I like to pop that bait into the fish. I immediately let the bait drop back into the bed. The fish is gonna zoom around, he's gonna circle down real quick, and right as he comes back around, I just like to give that bait a little bit of a twitch. It just kind of lets the bass hone in on where that bait is again. And a lot of times that's when he just comes and plows it and then runs off the bed. And that's when you set the hook. There's 2 places on a bass that I think are probably a little bit more sensitive areas, or areas that really get a fish moving around. And that's its head and that's its tail. So when I'm trying to hit a fish, when I'm trying to punch a bass here, I'm usually trying to pitch behind its head or pitch behind its tail and basically pop my soft plastic lure into the fish, into the tail. The thing that you are wanting to do is get that fish to spin around really aggressively and really quickly. A lot of times, and you know what I'm saying if you've done any bed fishing, but a lot of times when a fish is right about, when it's starting to get agitated and ticked off, it'll do these really quick spin arounds, right? You'll pop it in the head or you'll pop it in the tail. It does this really quick spin around, and then you'll see it nose down on the bait, right? And when you see it start nosing on the bait, you are getting really, really close to catching that fish. So just continue to do this. It's really important to know that this process could take 10 minutes, 5 minutes, but it could also take 30 minutes, 45 minutes to get this fish to basically get agitated enough to turn around and come back to the bait and finally eat that bait. It's very important to also know that a bass, when they first start picking that lure up, they're going to do something that's called kissing it, right? This is when they, in one motion, they basically suck that bait up and spit it off the bed without you even knowing. Like, it's hard to even set the hook in the time frame that they suck it in and blow it out, right? And this is that kiss that they do. Sometimes you can get a hook in them when they're doing that, but what I found out from just bed fishing over the years is there seems to be a time when all of a sudden bass are agitated enough that they're actually going to pick that bait up and they're going to run off the bed with it. And they're not just going to pick it up and blow it out. They're going to actually move off the bed with it. When that happens, that is the time that I set the hook. That's how you really punch a bass. It's really important to know, guys, before you start bed fishing, that you should really have a good pair of polarized sunglasses that's going to allow you to not only see the fish well, but it's going to allow you to see your lure really, really well. And also, one thing that can help with that is having a hat. If you have a hat on, it's going to block rays from the sun of getting behind your sunglasses. So make sure you have a good hat, a good pair of sunglasses. And if you're looking for a good hat, click the link below. You can pick up one of these bass hats, and it's going to greatly help support the Bass Fishing HQ channel. Tactic number 2 into catching a bed fish is really finding the sweet spot. Every bed that you come to is going to have what's called a sweet spot on it. If you think you have a 3 or 4 foot big bed, maybe even smaller than that, maybe it's a 2 foot bed, there's going to be a little space on that bed, about the size of a baseball, maybe 2 or 3 inches in diameter. That's going to be a sweet spot on the bed. And a lot of people have said that maybe this spot is where the bass actually laid its eggs. Maybe this is where the majority of the eggs are, and that could be true. I don't really know, but what I have found out is that a lot of times there is some sort of sweet spot on the bed, guys. And so really, to find this sweet spot, it's just trial and error, right? I'm going to pitch up and I'm basically going to cover the entire bed. I'm going to pitch to one side and I'm going to work that bait down. I'm going to pitch in the middle, I'm going to work that bait down, pitch to the other side, and I'm going to keep working that bed until I find the sweet spot. Now, typically, when you find this little sweet spot, this little baseball-sized spot, you're going to see that the bass is just a little bit more aggressive when it comes to that particular area, right? They're going to really kind of, you might come across the area and you see it just all of a sudden scurry right up to that bait, right? It's almost like a little bit of a sensitive area on the bed, right? It's the sweet spots. Typically what happens is once you find that sweet spot, you're going to want to just keep your lure in that sweet spot. Keep it moving. A lot of times I like to use some sort of Texas rig plastic, right? Like a Texas rig tube, for instance. And if I can keep that bait in the sweet spot and jiggle it in the sweet spot, eventually that bass is going to come up, it's going to pick that off, and it's going to run off, set the hook, and you got him. Tactic number 3 when it comes to catching a bed bass, and this is going to be the fish that is less locked on than other bass. Sometimes, like we talked about earlier, you get into where the bass really seem locked on, right? They're staying tight to that bed, but sometimes you get these fish, and guys, every fish is a little bit different. And I'm going to talk about this at the very end of the video about fish's personalities, but every fish is a little bit different. But sometimes you get these fish that they'll just kind of run off the bed when they see you, but they come almost immediately back, right? It's not even a minute or 2 minutes. It's literally within, 15 seconds. They kind of scurry off the bed and then they come back, and then maybe you pitch up there and they scurry off the bed and they come back, right? That fish is not necessarily super locked on, but he's still probably a catchable bass. This is basically the tactic that I use for those fish. What I do in this case is I like to stay, once I find that bass, I actually like to position my boat basically as far away from the fish as I possibly can while still being able to see it, right? That's the key. I still want to be able to see it. I still want to be able to see my lure, but you want to get back as far as you can. Guys, sometimes you'll come across beds that you could be sitting on top of the fish and he's going to bite it. But in this case, with these fish that are not as aggressive, you want to pull off the bed as much as you can. I like to cast my bait up to where that fish is, and I really just like to let my bait just soak in the bed. I like to do this with more of a finesse tactic. So I like to usually use a Ned rig is my #1 choice. Another one is a drop shot with a very small leader, or another thing could be a shaky head. But a Ned rig is really one of my favorites because of the exposed hook and because of the small presentation. What I'm doing here is what happens typically with these type of fish is they'll kind of scurry off the bed real quick, and as they're scurrying off, it's almost like they forget why they scurried off, and they come back to the bed, and when they come back to the bed, they think that they haven't heard a splash, they haven't heard anything, and what to do in that case is when they get back kind of into that home position that they like, I like to just slowly move the lure. And all of a sudden they're just like, it's like they just realize, oh crap, something's in my bed, you know, and then you'll see them start to nose on it. Obviously this is going to take several casts to do this, but sometimes you leave it on the bed long enough and he's going to come up, he's going to pick it and run off with it. So guys, those are the 3 tactics that I really like to use when I bed fish. Now, when it comes to lure selection, I'm really pretty simple. I really like fishing a Texas rig tube and a Texas rig crawl. Those are probably my first go-to bed fishing baits because I have a lot of control on them. I like to use it on a 3/8 ounce weight, 20-pound line, and I also like a green pumpkin or a natural colored bait in the most cases. Some guys like to use white because it allows them to see that bait a lot better, and if that's what you like, then use it. But I like to use green pumpkins, the natural colors, because again, they just look natural. The other type of lure that I like to use is finesse techniques. I really like a Ned rig, a drop shot that has a really small 2, 3, 4, 5 inch leader on it. That can be a really good bait too. Those are the 4 baits that I use a lot, and I like them in green pumpkins. But again, when you know you're going to be out there bed fishing, have 2, 3, 4 different options ready for a fish, different colors, different techniques, because every fish has a different personality. So if you show that fish a lot of different baits, a lot of times you're going to find out, hey, this bait really likes this opposed to this, or whatever it may be. They like a tube more than a drop shot, or they like a Ned rig more than a crawl. Whatever it may be, you're going to find that out when you have multiple different lures to be able to use for this fish. So guys, I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like, please leave a comment if you have any questions, and don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you guys in the next video.